Part 2 Chapter 1, The Quiet Pattern. I built my career on noise. Screams. CCTV. Digital footprints. Panicked parents who couldn't stop talking because silence meant admitting something final had happened. This case had none of that. The first disappearance looked ordinary, runaway probability, no signs of force. The second was similar. By the fifth, I started mapping ages instead of locations. By the 10th, I stopped calling them random. The missing skewed young, but not uniformly. Adolescents, yes, but also people in their early 20s. Always healthy. Always unremarkable. No shared social circle. No consistent geography. Part 3 What bothered me most wasn't the lack of clues. It was the absence of escalation. No ransom. No messaging. No ritual. No signature. People vanished as if they had been collected. I flagged the cases under a single working title: Deferred Resolution Kidnappings. My supervisor told me to stop grouping them. Said I was chasing coincidence. He reassigned the file 2 days later. It came back to my desk with 3 names blacked out and a note that simply read, Jurisdictional Conflict. Part 4. That's when I knew the system had already noticed the pattern. Part 5 Chapter 2, The Covenant Group. Every investigation eventually runs into money. The first shell corporation appeared while I was tracking a transportation subcontractor connected to 2 disappearances. The second appeared while I followed a private medical research grant linked to a third. By the fourth, I stopped pretending this was accidental. All roads pointed to a philanthropic consortium known publicly as the Covenant Group. Part 7 Chapter 3, The Archivist. The archivist lived below a university library, 3 floors beneath the climate-controlled collections. He wasn't on faculty. He wasn't paid well. He had access to texts no one argued over anymore. He didn't ask why I was there. He asked what word I was chasing. I told him, age. He nodded and pulled out a translation he said most people misread because they assumed punishment meant death. It doesn't, he said. In ancient texts, punishment is often continuity. Part 8. He showed me passages describing beings who descended before the flood, watchers, they were called. Neither mortal nor divine after their fall. Bound not to a place, but to a condition. They would remain on earth. They would remain conscious. They would remain unfinished. Their bodies aged. Their minds endured. Death refused them. What do they want? I asked. He shook his head. What anyone trapped in time wants, he said. To slow it. To reverse it. To borrow from those who still have it. I asked him why disappearances continued after the flood, after judgment. He closed the book. Because judgment didn't end them, he said. It confined them. Part 9 Chapter 4, The Death Cycle. Once I knew what to look for, the records stopped being subtle. Death certificates repeating across centuries. Medical examiners with identical phrasing separated by decades. Families whose genealogies forked in impossible ways. Part 10. The Covenant Group didn't preserve individuals. It preserved continuity. When a body failed beyond recovery, when aging progressed too far, the individual staged a death. fire, water, structural collapse. Public enough to be documented, controlled enough to erase inconsistencies. Then came withdrawal. Disappearances increased. Resources were diverted. Transportation routes went dark. When the figure re-emerged, they did so younger, under a new name, with assets quietly transferred forward. The public faces never noticed. They weren't supposed to. They were management. The others were inheritance. I tried to publish my findings anonymously. The document corrupted itself mid-upload. That night, my apartment power cut out at exactly 3 a.m. When it came back on at 3:33 a.m. my case files were untouched, except for one addition. A handwritten note placed neatly on my desk. Time is the only god we failed to escape. 12 Chapter 5, The ones who refused. Not all of them complied. That was the detail the archivist left out. Some refused to continue the cycle. They rationed restoration. They waited too long. Their bodies collapsed inward, skin thinning, organs stiffening, joints locking. Alive. Aware. Unable to die. Part 13. The Covenant Group kept them hidden, sealed chambers, subterranean facilities, places without jurisdiction. They called these figures the remnants. Warnings. Elders. Liabilities. One of them was still conscious after nearly 5,000 years. I know because someone wanted me to know. The final message came without encryption, without threat. Just coordinates and a single sentence. You investigate disappearances. We investigate endings. I never went to the coordinates. Some truths don't need confirmation to be real. 13 Epilogue, Case Status, Open. The case is officially closed. Unofficially, I still track missing persons. I still map ages. I still watch for periods of silence followed by sudden renewal in certain institutions. The world doesn't need rulers anymore. It needs continuity. Part 15. And somewhere beneath it all, the ones who fell learned the oldest lesson in the book. If you cannot die, you must control who disappears instead. Part 16 Chapter 6, The Witness Who Walked Away. I was not born into the covenant. No one is. You are recruited, identified, observed, tested, long before you are told what you are serving. I entered through the daylight tier, logistics, compliance, risk containment. The kind of work that makes powerful people sleep better without knowing why. At first, it looked like any other elite institution. Silence was rewarded. Curiosity was redirected. Loyalty was framed as stewardship. We were told we protected civilization from destabilizing truths, that some knowledge, if mishandled, would fracture markets, nations, faith itself. Part 17. That part wasn't even a lie. The lie was scale. The lie was age. The first time I met one of them, I didn't know what I was seeing. He looked 40, maybe 45. Fit. Immaculate posture. But when he moved, time followed a fraction of a second behind him, like a shadow delayed. His eyes were not predatory. They were tired in a way no human eyes ever are. He called me custodian. Not by name. By function. I learned the real structure slowly. Public Covenant members believed they funded continuity. They never met the source of it. The shadow tier, my tier, handled transitions. We prepared deaths. We smoothed inheritances. We identified locations where disappearances would not fracture attention. We called it harvest management. I told myself we were saving more lives than we took. That stability required cost. That history had always worked this way. Then I saw a remnant. They don't let you see them until they're sure you won't run. The chamber was sealed with systems older than any modern security protocol: stone, alloy, scripture engraved into steel. Inside was a figure that should have been dead for millennia. Skin translucent. Limbs curled inward. Eyes open. Fully aware. Unable to move. Unable to end. This is what happens when restraint becomes rebellion, my supervisor said. Mercy without compliance. The remnant spoke. Not aloud. Not with sound. But I understood him anyway. Time does not forgive us, he said. It only waits. That was the night the stories stopped being symbolic. The Covenant's inner truth is simple: the Watchers were not erased. They were contained. And containment requires infrastructure, money, law, transportation, silence. We don't rule the world. We maintain the cage it lives in. Most of them hate what they must do. That's the other lie people wouldn't believe. They don't feed out of pleasure. They feed out of fear: fear of becoming that thing in the chamber, fear of being conscious forever in a body that has finished falling apart. Some have tried alternatives. Synthetic restoration. Time dilution therapies. Nothing works for long. Only what carries unused years. I defected when I was asked to oversee my first transition alone. The file contained a list of disappearances scheduled to coincide with a staged death. I realized then that the Covenant doesn't react to missing persons. It creates them. I copied what I could. I leaked fragments, never enough to be traceable, never enough to be believed outright. The detective found the pattern faster than anyone else ever had. That was not an accident. We are not allowed to destroy evidence of ourselves entirely. One of the oldest among them insists on this rule. He says judgment requires witnesses. I am one of those witnesses now. I don't expect absolution. I don't expect safety. I expect time, less of it than they have, but enough to speak. If you are reading this, understand one thing: they are not gods. They are not demons. They are prisoners who learn to make the world comfortable enough to forget the bars. And the reason disappearances never stop is not because they are cruel. It's because immortality is starvation that never ends. Part 18, Chapter 7, The Remnant Speaks. I remember light. Not the light men mean when they say the word: no sun, no flame, but order. A brightness that had direction, weight, intention. We moved within it as sound moves within music. There was no hunger there. No before or after. When we descended, we did not fall screaming. We chose. That is the lie we still cling to: that choice makes the sentence fair. Part 19. Time was not part of us then. We measured nothing. We endured nothing. The earth taught us sequence, step after step, breath after breath, and with sequence came desire. Desire hardened into need. Need into fear. They say our punishment was binding. They are wrong. Our punishment was continuation. I am what remains when a body finishes aging but a soul is denied release. I have been sealed in stone and machine for longer than your languages have existed. My bones are soft now. My organs labor without purpose. Pain is constant, but pain is not the worst of it. Part 20. The worst is clarity. I remember every face I ever wore. Every name. Every era when I convinced myself I could wait longer, feed less, resist the cycle. I believed righteousness might purchase an ending. It does not. Those who continue, the ones you chase, investigator, they are not braver than I was. They are simply more afraid. Afraid of this chamber. Afraid of stillness. Afraid of learning that immortality without renewal becomes a cage with no darkness to sleep in. We learned early what carries time. Blood is not magic. It is record. It remembers youth because youth has not yet been spent. When consumed, it does not forgive us, it delays us. A cruel mercy. Part 21. The covenant calls me a warning. They are correct. I am what happens when mercy is mistaken for escape. I hear the world above me through instruments and vibrations, cities rising and collapsing like waves. Empires come and go in the time it takes one of us to grow weary. Your species believes it rules itself. That belief is not entirely false. We do not command. We endure. We learned long ago that control is unnecessary if continuity is maintained. Influence replaces force. Silence replaces terror. Disappearances are tidier than wars. You think judgment has not come. You misunderstand. Judgment arrived the moment we were forced to watch history continue without us. I am not asking for release. I am past hope. I speak because the oldest among us decreed that witnesses must exist, that someone must remember we were not always this. That our brilliance preceded our fear. If you expose them, nothing ends. If you silence them, nothing ends. Time will finish us when heaven decides it has waited long enough. Until then, the world above will keep turning, and the ones who still walk will keep borrowing years they cannot create. Remember this, investigator. The greatest punishment is not death. It is never being allowed to be done. And now you have heard me. That is enough. Part 22, Chapter 8, The Final Rule of the Covenant. There is a rule no one writes down. Not because it is secret, everyone in the shadow tier knows it, but because rules written can be revised, challenged, or forgotten. This one must be remembered. Witnesses are permitted. Witnesses are required. Part 23. The covenant learned this rule the hard way, in the centuries after the flood, when secrecy curdled into arrogance. In those years, they erased every trace of themselves. No records. No survivors. No rumors allowed to mature. They believed total silence would protect them. It nearly destroyed them. Without witnesses, they forgot who they were supposed to be hiding from. They forgot heaven. They forgot judgment. They forgot fear. And when fear disappears from immortal beings, cruelty becomes efficient. The oldest among them, the one they call the steward of continuance, ended that era with a decree older than any government. A truth without a witness becomes a lie, and lies invite reckoning. Since then, the covenant has allowed fractures. archivists, defectors, investigators who see almost everything, enough to remember the shape of the cage, never enough to break it. Witnesses serve a purpose. They stabilize the system. They absorb guilt. They keep the story tethered to conscience. A witness reminds the watchers that they were once servants, not survivors. And so when the detective assembled the pattern, when he refused to look away, the Covenant did not erase him. They evaluated him. Part 24. Silence or disappearance. Those were the only outcomes ever offered. Part 25. Closing chapter, The Choice. The offer arrived without ceremony. No threats. No deadline. Just a folder placed on my kitchen table while I slept. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't hear it close. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a non-disclosure agreement so comprehensive it bordered on sacramental. Sign it, and I would keep my career, my life, my name. The cases would be reassigned. The disappearances would continue. I would wake each morning knowing the truth and never speaking it. I would become a living witness. 6. The second document was a travel itinerary with no return date, a new identity, and a list of places where no one asks questions. The final page contained a single sentence. History remembers the vanished more kindly than the silent. Disappearance meant exile. Not death, never death, but removal. I would never investigate another case. Never testify. Never be found. I sat at the table until dawn. I thought about the remnant sealed in stone, conscious and unfinished. I thought about the archivist underground, cataloging truths no one wanted. I thought about the defector who handed me the pattern knowing what it would cost him. Most of all, I thought about the missing. People think witnesses are brave because they speak. They're wrong. Witnesses are brave because they stay. I signed the first document. The ink dried instantly. The Covenant kept its word. My career stabilized. Promotions came without explanation. The cases vanished into other departments. My name stopped appearing on sensitive files. But sometimes, when the city goes quiet, I feel eyes on me, not hostile, not protective. Watching. I understand now why they allow witnesses. Because as long as someone remembers what they are not finished becoming monsters. And because one day, whether by judgment, release, or exhaustion, time will end for them. When that day comes, the world will need someone who remembers what walked among it and why it finally stopped. Until then, I investigate nothing. I remember everything. Case status, open. Part 27. This story is fiction based in truth. To learn more about who these fallen ones are, follow this channel on YouTube. https://youtube.com/@fatestflaterther C equals QKACHYRZEPVCZLMPA. @fatestflaterther on YouTube. He doesn't have all the answers, but he is revealing truth.
The ones who remain: hospitality, discernment, and the long punishment of continuity. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Hebrews 13:2. The command is simple. The warning is not. Hebrews does not tell the reader to identify angels. It tells the reader to behave rightly when identity is hidden. The test is not recognition, it is posture. And the reason given, angels unawares, is not metaphorical flourish. It is covenant logic rooted in Israel's oldest and most unsettling traditions. Scripture assumes a world in which messengers move among men without announcement, and where the unseen intersects the ordinary not through spectacle, but through silence. That assumption becomes dangerous only when it is sentimentalized. Angels, messengers, and the problem of continuity. The biblical word translated angel means messenger. It does not mean good. It does not mean holy. It does not mean trustworthy. Those qualifiers are supplied by context, not by the term itself. Scripture itself affirms that some messengers rebelled. Jude speaks plainly. The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. The language is judicial, not annihilative. These beings are not described as destroyed. They are described as restrained, aware, and awaiting. This distinction matters, because ancient Jewish thought did not equate punishment with erasure. In much of Second Temple Judaism, punishment meant continuity under limitation. To continue without release. To remain without function. To endure without escape. 2. The Enochic witness, punishment as being forced to remain. The Book of Enoch, an extra-biblical text, but one known, cited, and assumed within the worldview of early Judaism and Christianity, makes this logic explicit. According to Enoch, the watchers who descended before the flood were judged in a specific way. They were cut off from heaven, they were denied return, their authority was revoked, their condition was fixed, their awareness remained. Modern shorthand says their wings were clipped. The ancient texts say something more severe. They were confined to the earth and to time. Enoch does not describe their punishment as death. It describes it as being forced to continue existing inside a corrupted condition until final judgment. This is why Enoch's punishment is feared more than execution. Death ends sequence. Continuation forces sequence to go on. In Enochic logic, the sentence is not, you will die. The sentence is, you will remain. 3. Long duration and the weight of time. Because the Watchers' rebellion is placed before the flood, their confinement, within the worldview of the text, spans thousands of years. Later Jewish chronology situate this duration roughly in the range of 4 to 5 millennia, not as a precise scientific claim, but as a recognition of extreme temporal endurance. The Dead Sea Scrolls confirm that this was not French mythology. Fragments of the Book of Giants, found at Qumran, preserve the same core idea. The fallen watchers were not erased. They were contained, and their consequences persisted. This establishes an important theological principle. Judgment did not end them. Judgment confined them. IV. Your stated position, author's opinion. What follows is opinion, explicitly marked as such. Opinion. I believe these fallen beings age in a manner analogous to men, but within an immortal framework. They do not die as humans die. Their bodies deteriorate. Their spirits do not fade. I further believe that these beings possess, or have developed, age-reducing or body-preserving technologies, which must be periodically used to maintain function and appearance. When such restoration is delayed or refused, I believe their bodies eventually become corpse-like, degraded, immobilized, or grotesque, yet their consciousness remains intact, fully aware, unable to exit the body. This belief is not directly stated in Scripture. It is an attempt to synthesize the biblical insistence on conscious existence, Enoch's depiction of long-term punishment, Jewish concepts of continuity as judgment, and the logical problem of immortality under decay. If immortality is enforced without renewal, then decay does not end awareness, it traps it. V. The pattern of continuity, narrative framework. This is where the fiction becomes a lens rather than a claim. In The Ones Who Remain, the fallen are not gods, demons, or rulers. They are prisoners who learn how to survive inside the sentence. They do not rule the world. They maintain continuity within it. Power, in this model, is not domination. It is infrastructure. The Covenant does not exist to conquer. It exists to manage decay, stage deaths, disappearances, inheritance without origin, continuity without exposure. Those who refuse the cycle become remnants, beings who are alive, aware, immobile, sealed, unfinished. This fictional structure mirrors the theological claim of Enoch and Jude. The worst punishment is not death. It is never being allowed to be done. 6. Hebrews 13, 2 revisited. Now return to Hebrews. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers. This is not a command to be naive. It is a command to be ethically consistent when identity is obscured. Because if some messengers are holy, some are fallen, some are bound, some endure across ages, and none announce themselves clearly, then righteousness must be practiced without certainty. Hospitality is commanded. Discernment is required. Cruelty is forbidden. Paranoia is condemned. You are not asked to identify angels. You are asked to act as though your behavior matters even when you don't know who you're dealing with. 7. Why witnesses matter. Your story introduces the most unsettling rule of all. Witnesses are permitted. Witnesses are required. This aligns with a deep biblical pattern. Judgment requires testimony. Truth requires memory. Continuity without witnesses becomes corruption. In allowing witnesses to exist, the watchers remember that they are still judged, even if the sentence is delayed. And perhaps this is the final warning of the chapter. The fallen do not persist because they are powerful. They persist because time itself has become their prison. They borrow years because they cannot create them. They hide because exposure reminds them of heaven. They fear stillness more than judgment. Closing warning. This chapter is not asking the reader to believe every detail. It is asking the reader to understand us. If immortal beings are denied release, immortality becomes starvation. And starvation produces systems, not monsters. So when Scripture warns you about strangers, it is not telling you to fear them. It is telling you to live as though every encounter is witnessed, by heaven, by history, and by beings who know what it means to remain when release is denied. Because the greatest punishment is not death. It is continuation without end.